Hello, hello, welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and I do a book review a week, mixing up a cocktail while I review it. It's called Books and Booze. I am running a day behind, yesterday being the last Sunday of the month. In June, usually I read a book on a president for the last Sunday of the month. Since June 2024 was JFK, this last week's book was An Unfinished Life, John F. Kennedy, 1917 to 1963 by Robert Dallek. Assuming I said his last name correctly. The accompanying cocktail is a daiquiri, which is apparently what Jackie made for JFK when he won the presidency in 1960. This daiquiri recipe, and there's a bunch of them out there, but this is the one, like, when I found the thing that said Jackie mixed this up for JFK, it was this recipe. So it's 2 ounces of rum, 1 ounce of lime juice, 3 drops of Falernum, and 2 ounces of Limeade Concentrate. Be a lime flavored cocktail. So let's do this. JFK was born, his name was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, okay? He went by Jack with his friends and family, but it's JFK. Everybody knows who we're talking about, right? He was born May 29th, 1917 to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy in Brookline, Massachusetts. 2 ounces of rum. I'm not sure I have 2 ounces of rum in here. I think I have 2 ounces of rum. Oh, I do not. Well, crap on toast. I'm going to have to go get some more rum. Well, skippity-doo-dah. Let's go get the rum. Well, so that's different. I'm mixing my rums today. I ran out of gold rum, so I'm using white rum for the rest of this cocktail. I'm not sure if I should be mixing rums, but we're going to do it anyways, because that's what I got. I don't want to have to go to the liquor store just to get an ounce of rum. It's fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. Where was I? Okay, Joe Sr. was an up-and-coming businessman. He would amass an absolute fortune. And he wasn't necessarily dirt poor when everything started, but he did have to take out a loan for that first mortgage for the house that he and Rose moved into. Made no difference. He was obscenely wealthy by the time JFK was ready to run for president. Becomes relevant. So both Kennedy and Fitzgerald's clans were embedded in local politics. The Fitzgeralds more than the Kennedys, believe it or not. But it certainly paved the way for JFK's future, not as directly as you might think, though. See, JFK was the second born of 9 children. His older brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., was the one slated by Joe Sr. to be president. So, and like literally, that was his destination. He was going to be president. That was the path chosen for him by Joe Sr. and I think both grandfathers. I could have had real lime, but my husband needs it for his Coronas, so here we go. The 3 drops of Falernum is going to be interesting because there's no dropper op. I think it's an open bottle. I do have an eyedropper bottle, so we're just going to do it like this. And here we go, 3 drops of Falernum. Joe Jr. was slated to be president. JFK grew up in his brother's shadow, and he very much was like the second son, right? He didn't have any particular career aspirations, but he grew up rich. I mean, like I said, Joe Sr. was building the wealth, and he got right to work. By the time JFK was ready for college, he literally had his pick of which schools he wanted to go to. And while the family preferred Harvard, he initially picked Princeton for his choice, actually. He only was there for like a semester, though, before he dropped out and then made the switch to Harvard instead. And I think that part of what caused him to drop out of Princeton were ongoing health issues. I mean, he was not the healthiest of kids when he was growing up, and he would ultimately be diagnosed with colitis, prostatitis, and Addison's disease. And it was the corticosteroids that he was prescribed for. It was pre-diagnosis with Addison's disease. I think it was prescribed before his colitis, but it led to back problems. That's one of the side effects of corticosteroids is osteoporosis, and it basically caused his long-term use of the corticosteroids led to degeneration of several vertebrae in his lower back. All of this happened before the outbreak of World War II. Should be doing this by weight, but I'm not gonna. Now, all of that happened pre-World War II, but the family kept their privacy, like their medical privacy, very, very private. Now, obviously, I think the whole world now knows about daughter Rosemary's lobotomy. That kind of made the rounds on the interwebs a while back about how horrible that was. And she's kind of portrayed in that meme as being just this carefree, spirited young girl, and why would they do that? Oh, it was because she was disobedient and didn't listen to her parents, and that's why Joe lobotomized her. And that's not quite accurate. The lobotomy happened because there had been complications during her birth. We're not quite sure what. But basically she didn't get enough oxygen, and it did lead to some pretty severe mental defects. I don't think she ever learned to read, but I'm not going to swear to that. But that did lead to behavior problems when she grew older as a result of this. Oh no. Please don't kill my keyboard. It's purple and pretty. I like the keyboard. Now, I didn't put ice in here because the Limeade Concentrate is frozen. I'm just going to shake it up. So anyways, Rosemary did have a lobotomy. That is true. Joe Sr. did it without alerting Rose that he was going to do this lobotomy for their second daughter. I think she was the second daughter. Well, I'll worry about it later. And she ultimately ended up spending her life in a sanitarium because of the lobotomy. I mean, and in Joe's defense, and there's not a whole lot to defend about the man because he was a character. But in his defense, when this all went down in like 1930s, lobotomies were the thing to do, all right? It was not known to be to cause the long-term problems that obviously we are all very well aware of sitting, 100 years later in judgment of him. And he genuinely believed that it would help his daughter. And clearly that did not, because nobody actually profits from a lobotomy. That is a tart fucking cocktail. I found another one that had sugar in it. Maybe I should have done the sugar one. Whew. Whoa. If you like sour cocktails, this might be a good one for you. Sour. Okay. Oh, health problems. I was talking about JFK's health problems. Excuse me. So they did keep their health problems, and his medical problems were a closely kept family secret. I mean, they largely weren't even known until well after his death. Serving was the thing to do, and in all fairness, JFK wanted to serve because he was pretty well horrified. I mean, who wouldn't be by what was happening, right? And he was actually serving with ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, when the bombing at Pearl Harbor happened. So there you go. But in order to get there, even though his medical history would have given him an easy out, instead he had Joe Sr. pull some strings and get him into the Navy. And that's where he was serving. Like I said, he was at part of the Office of Naval Intelligence when Pearl Harbor happened. He found that work very interesting. However, one of his lifelong habits, learned from Joe Sr., that very interesting character, was a habit of promiscuity. He was a womanizer. And that did not stop with Jackie, although we'll come back to that in a little bit. So JFK became involved with a journalist who had at one point interviewed Hitler, and there was some belief that she may have been a Nazi spy. So JFK was shuttled off to a do-nothing position. I think it was in South Carolina. And he quickly grew bored with this new posting, and the boredom hit its peak right around the time General MacArthur was evacuated from the Philippines via PT boat, which made PT boats the hot new posting. And Joe Sr. pulled some strings again, and JFK got assigned to the PT boats. Oh yeah, that's tart. Whew. Oh my God. Now, he did okay with the PT boats. Now, he was probably not one of the best officers the U.S. Navy ever had, but when his PT boat was torpedoed, he lost 2 crew members immediately, but coordinated the rest for survival, and they were eventually rescued, picked up by the Navy. He managed to alert the Navy to their whereabouts via a coconut message, and that's not even a joke. He literally carved his position into a coconut and had a native islander deliver it to the U.S. Navy. After all of this, he was ready to leave the military, and because, hey, war sucks, why wouldn't he want to leave? Lucky for him, his degenerative disc condition raised its head again, and the U.S. Navy blamed the condition on having been swimming for like 17 hours in the ocean while trying to get to safety. And so they medically discharged him. I think there was like one person who was like, no, wait a minute, he had this beforehand. This is all a fraud. You guys fell for it. And they were like, nah, he was swimming for 17 hours. Let's see how good your back's doing after 17 hours. And they medically discharged him. And at this point, he had to figure out what to do with his life. Now, most of his family maintained that politics was not his chosen career path, that that's not what he would have chosen to do. And only one of his close friends believed that he would have gone into politics regardless. It doesn't matter, because ultimately the decision was made for him when older brother Joe Jr. was killed in a mission over the English Channel. And with that, JFK's course was set. the family grieved, and I think he did love his brother. I mean, there was certainly sibling rivalry there, but I think he was devastated by the loss. But he was set to become congressman at that point. And again, I don't know if that was his choice or Joe Sr., but Kennedy wanted one of his kids to be in office, and so JFK was up to bat because Joe Jr. had died. So he started with congressman, House of Representatives specifically. And again, you really do have to admire JFK's determination. And if you have ever had persistent back pain, if you've ever had degenerative disc, slip disc, scoliosis, pinched sciatic nerve, anything like that, reading about how he would literally go door to door or stand for hours outside a factory shaking hands with all the workers. I mean, don't get me wrong, Daddy's money bought plenty of advertising, but he did the work too. He put in the hours to get the votes himself. He didn't just slap advertising on the radio and call it good. He went door to door way back when they did door to door campaigns, and he did it himself, and that's admirable and not easy to do. And he did the whole thing smiling and masking the fact that in the privacy of his own home he was using crutches to get around. So that was the 1946 election, which he won. He would serve 3 terms before making the leap to senator with the 52 election year. And he served as senator from 1953. He won his re-election as senator, and then, of course, had to resign when he won the presidency in 1960. Now, during his time in Congress, he did not contribute to any landmark legislation. Large chunks of his time while he was in Congress, both chambers, he was dealing with ongoing health issues, including several surgeries to try and relieve his back pain. It was during this time that he was officially diagnosed with Addison's disease, which is an adrenal insufficiency disorder, like your body can't produce cortisone and certain types of, steroids, hence the corticosteroids. But he didn't have any legislation to put forward on his own, and he knew that if he wanted to be president, he needed to make himself known outside of the state of Massachusetts. So to that end, he did several things. He wrote a book, which won a Pulitzer Prize, called Profiles in Courage, which was basically a series of brief biographies on 8 Americans, mostly senators, and how they stood out from the crowd to embody the American ideal. He initially tried to secure the vice presidency spot for himself on Adlai Stevenson's 1956 presidential run, but failing that, he actively campaigned for Stevenson, giving hundreds of speeches across the nation. I mean, every other day he was traveling to give these speeches. And while the country has had bachelor presidents before, Martin Van Buren was a widower technically, Thomas Jefferson was a widower, but James Buchanan never married, Grover Cleveland was not married when he was elected. JFK knew that Americans were more likely to elect a married man. There's something about that screams of stability to the working middle-class American, right? Married man with children is a stable home life. Enter Jacqueline Lee Bouvier. They courted, I think it said, for 2 years before they married. And by any metric, JFK was an absolute shit husband. Jackie would be pregnant 4 times, miscarrying twice. The first miscarriage was in it was right after they married. I mean, within 2 years of their marriage. JFK was on a yacht in Europe, and he was having sex with other women. The only reason he returned to be with Jackie while she was recovering from her first miscarriage is that one of his friends who was with him said, hey, a divorce is unlikely to get you elected president. I mean, like I said, he was a shit husband. I mean, his womanizing was almost, well, hell, it's not even almost, it was an open secret. I mean, the press never called him out on it. That was not what you did back in the 1960s. But, Jackie would be out, and she would call ahead to the White House to let them know that she was coming home so that whoever JFK was currently diddling could put her panties back on before Jackie got there. And the only one JFK actually denied having sex with was Marilyn Monroe. I kind of think that it's because she was so famous, and he was, of course, famously married. He was the president, and so he denied it. But I don't know. It's one of those enduring myths. No idea if it's true, but it just, everybody, it's one of those, I said, it's an open secret, right? Everybody knows JFK and Marilyn did something. They must have. She was Marilyn Monroe, and he was JFK. He never denied anybody else. He was actually caught on tape telling his younger brother Bobby, at Bobby's wedding, that just because he was getting married didn't mean he had to give up sex with other women. So yeah, it's a peach of a man. He made his White House intentions known in January 1960. and began campaigning at individual state primaries, winning the primaries in the states that he had them in. And of course, winning the Democratic Party nomination, picked Lyndon Johnson as his running mate. His Catholicism was an issue, but he managed to make it a non-issue and went on to win, being sworn in as president on January 20th, 1961. And while he was in office for not even quite 3 years, he definitely had an eventful 3 years. I mean, it started almost immediately with the Bay of Pigs fiasco. It is indicative of the type of politician JFK was, that while he was, entirely responsible for creating the crisis in the first place, he is given full credit for keeping it from escalating to open warfare. I mean, it never would have happened if he hadn't authorized the CIA's operation, but he gets full credit for not letting it escalate. Weird. His talks with Khrushchev in Vienna did not go well. Mostly Khrushchev was more interested in debating the merits of communism over capitalism than in reaching a détente on Berlin. What Khrushchev really wanted was for the flood of refugees from East Berlin to West Berlin to stop. He threatened just taking over all of Berlin, which Kennedy said would definitely lead to war, and since both of them were nuclear powers, nobody wanted that. And Khrushchev was really pushing that line, and the way he found out of it was to build the Berlin Wall instead of invading West Berlin. Which, I mean, Kennedy had to admit that was a nice piece of statesmanship to allow everybody to gracefully back down, but obviously it sucked for Germany for the next 28 years. Kennedy's civil rights record is absolutely appalling, and it's pretty evident that, almost immediately, it was evident that he paid lip service to the idea of civil rights just to get the African vote, because when the South exploded in violence, he did basically nothing to stop it. He did have Bobby, who was basically his behind-the-scenes mouthpiece, kind of push through some countermeasures with various governors, and JFK made noise about the Commission for Equal Employment Opportunity and the need to hire more black people in federal positions, like front-facing federal positions, because while Katherine Johnson was actively working for the space program at this point in time, she is not mentioned in the book. She wasn't a front-facing black person, and she was, a woman, not a man, so she clearly didn't count. Sorry, the thought entered my mind, because if you haven't seen the movie Hidden Figures, it's actually very, very good. I have the book, I just haven't read it yet. I think I'll do that next year. Martin Luther King Jr. called him out several times for his inconsistency in putting action to words that he spoke. He's like, yeah, you are all talk, buddy, but actions talk and bullshit walk, and you are full of bullshit. There is some indication that Kennedy was waiting to make real moves on civil rights until his second term, assuming he would have gotten elected. And he probably would have. To be fair, he probably would have. He was an immensely popular president even in his day. But once he's reelected, he doesn't have to worry about a third term, because the amendment passed, the 26th Amendment? Whichever amendment they passed after FDR that said, no, you can only serve for 2 terms as president, he wouldn't have been able to run a third term, and so he was like, yeah, I'll just wait until my second term, which is such a chicken shit way to lead. The Cuban Missile Crisis actually made me feel bad for Khrushchev. He wanted our missiles out of Turkey because, we're pointing guns at him, why shouldn't he point them at us? And he was like, hey, you don't like missiles at your back door? Well, neither do we. Why don't you remove them from Turkey, we'll remove them from Cuba, and we'll call it good. And I think that's ultimately what happened. And despite warnings from, everyone, absolutely everyone, including Charles de Gaulle, warned Kennedy about what an absolute clusterfuck war in Southeast Asia would be, JFK still authorized military advisors to go to Vietnam, and as of November 63, we already had at least 100 dead. And, of course, it only gets worse from there. I will say the author's discussion of the assassination when it happened, or more specifically when the author got to the point, was quite simple, and it made me laugh on several fronts. Couple of quotes here. Quote, when he, meaning Jack, showed the black bordered ad to Jackie, the president said, quote, we're heading out into nut country today, but Jackie, if somebody wants to shoot me from a window with a rifle, nobody can stop it, so why worry about it, end quote. Of course, then they did. That is definitely a tart. Okay. Holy shit. But seriously, it was the next paragraph summation. Quote, Of course, there were security precautions that could be taken, but in protecting the president from potential threats during his trip to Texas and Dallas in particular, the Secret Service and FBI worried too much about the ultra-right and too little about a possible assassin from the radical left. Which definitely got me laughing, because, I mean, usually that's how the radical left ends up doing so much damage. I mean, the government, despite a very clear historical evidence, failed to see the left as dangerous. I don't know why. I mean, any nutbag, whether they're left or right, is fully capable of being completely dangerous, but for whatever reason, it's always the right they're worried about, even though it's the left that do all this damage with, mass shootings. Lime. Oh my god. My jaw is still puckering from this thing. That is a very tart cocktail. This book was a drag. I mean, the first 3 parts about his growing up, his time in Congress, his run up to presidency were excellent. It was fast-paced, it kept moving forward, it was a little repetitious in regards to JFK's health issues and womanizing, but the repeat of those issues were restated in context of how the health issues were impacting Kennedy at that point in time, how his womanizing was viewed by contemporaries at that point in time. The last and longest part, which isn't even the longest part of his life, right, was an absolute just head desk pounding, soul-sucking repetition of itself. I mean, it's like every single chapter, the author repeated again and again and again that JFK was dealing with Cuba, communism, Khrushchev, civil rights, Vietnam, all at the same time. And so it just repeated itself over and over and over and over and over again. And Dallek should have broken it down into Cuba. Bay of Pigs leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev. First conference in Berlin led to the Berlin Wall and USSR's supplying of missiles to Cuba for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Civil rights. He was shaky on them, but here's what he wanted to do, and how he ultimately responded to XYZ incidents. But the repetition, my god. The last chapter was like a hurried summary of all of the above, with the assassination basically being the 2 paragraphs I quoted above. 70 pages of recap, 2 paragraphs of, and then he was killed. I met with friends yesterday, and one of them asked me which book I was reading, and I told her this one, and I said, I have 40 pages left, and he's still not dead yet. So yeah. The section on the actual presidency could have been much better organized. It was just so numbing. And it was okay. The book was okay overall. But it's exhausting and frustrating to read something that keeps circling back to information that's already been covered. And again. And again. I mean, I definitely got the sense that the author was being paid by the word. Because why else would a book about one of the shortest presidencies in history be as long as a book about the absolute longest presidency in history? Anyways, that's all I got for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on Sunday. Bye.